Why should we be talking about entrapments?
The fire service in general likes talking about them.
Why do we like talking about them, you think?
There's some aspect of the hero, you know what I mean? Like the danger, they make movies about it. You know, they don't make movies about not putting the chalk block behind it. You know what I mean? It's that aspect for, it's the risk element. It's that danger. It's that hero. We put our life on the line. You know what I mean? What we're talking about when we say that is we risk getting overrun by fire. Like, whoa, the dragon, and we're going to get in front of the beast. And all of that stuff. The undertone is, yeah, I'm kind of a badass because I go out there and deal with this big, ugly, dangerous thing that could overrun me and kill me.
This is the Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center podcast. I'm Alex Victora, Assistant Center Director of the Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center here in sunny Tucson, Arizona. For this week's podcast, Travis and I go into the archives back to January of 2018 when he and I recorded a great conversation on a tough topic. You might want to have your NWCG glossary handy. Google it. Today, we're talking about entrapments. Let's flash back now to the second week of January 2018. It was warm in Tucson. Travis and I should have been out in the desert riding bikes or scouting for deer, but we were inside talking about entrapments. One of the main reasons why we were having this conversation had everything to do with the 2017 Annual Incident Review Summary. Have you seen it? Check it out. It's 10 pages of incidents and lessons from the 2017 fire season. One of the things that emerged in this analysis, which is primarily Travis's job here at the Lessons Learned Center, is an interesting trend that we've noticed for years and years. Firefighters, and even those who are tasked with reviewing close calls and near misses, are very hesitant to use the word entrapment, the E word. Why is that? Before we get there, let's take a look at entrapments in 2017. Back in the second week of January 2018, Travis was in the midst of his analysis, and some of the numbers he shares here don't match up exactly with what's in the final 2017 summary. Regardless of the specific numbers, the broader points about entrapments are still relevant. Let's get into it.
2017 was a big year for reported entrapments, and the majority of those that were reported chose not to use the word entrapment when they reported them. They said things like egress compromised, or what were some of the other ones? I think there was actually a deployment, shelter deployment, that wasn't talked about as an entrapment. Burnover, that one I think that's just, maybe that's just language, whatever people use. But even that, I think it's possible that somewhere in there there's resistance to using the word entrapment. Somehow entrapment is a dirty word where burnover isn't. But entrapment is definitely something you do not want to accuse somebody of. Mm-hmm. And I actually think that it might be an outgrowth of, the kinder, gentler, the FLA, hey, nobody, that this shift in language might actually be part of that. Because if we're going to be, nicer to the people that these bad things happen to, then why would you go throwing them under the bus and saying that they were entrapped when actually they just had to, scramble a little bit, or they had to wait, they had to, let a pulse go by, or they found an alternate safety zone, or what I mean, they just took a little heat. All of these hedge words is really a social thing. Hey man, I'm not gonna say you were entrapped, says the writer of the report, to gain credibility with the person they're working with, the person that was actually in there dancing around trying to get away from some fire that completely cut them off from their plan.
Which is
That's an entrapment.
an entrapment.
Yeah.
Right.
If what you planned didn't work out, if you had to go anywhere other than your plan, or your escape route timing wasn't, what, I can't remember what the words are in the definition.
Remember how I said you might want your NWCG glossary handy for this conversation? Well, if you haven't looked it up, I'll save you the trouble. The NWCG glossary defines entrapment as a situation where personnel are unexpectedly caught in a fire behavior-related, life-threatening position where planned escape routes or safety zones are absent, inadequate, or compromised. An entrapment may or may not include deployment of a fire shelter for its intended purpose. These situations may or may not result in injury. They include near misses. And in 2017, we received 20 reports that meet that definition I just shared with you. Of these 20 reports, only 4 included the word entrapment.
Yeah, that's an entrapment. It's funny, like some of the hedge words used to try and avoid the word entrapment actually use the words in the definition of entrapment. Escape route compromised.
Well, sounds like you've taken part of the definition of entrapment. Yeah.
And I think it's really important to emphasize the fact that I'm not trying to do this. I'm not trying to just be a
jerk face.
Just nope, actually you were entrapped. That's not the whole point. The point is actually that bigger thing about this is way more common. We need to rectify the words. We need to say what it is that's happening so that we can actually deal with it. It's an awareness thing. If we keep kind of putting it under the rug, we're not ever going to be able to deal with the reality that, hey, this happens a lot, and it's scary. It is scary how common this is. For me personally, as a practitioner, I'm out there doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not immune to anything. Doesn't matter what checklists I have or how dialed I am. I am not immune to shit. It's scary when you start actually, and that is actually, to me, that's progress. That's where we're actually going to gain some ground, is by acknowledging what is actually happening. And it just happens a lot. Some would argue that's the price of fighting fire aggressively.
The way we do it.
And we can talk all about Canada and Australia, and they don't use fire shelters, and they have entrapments. But it's more about I have no idea if they have entrapments at the level that we do. Of course, there's drastically different numbers of people involved in fire, and I'm sure you could figure that out somehow. But I think it has to do with tactics. Like we fly people into the middle of nowhere, or we drive way out. You know what I mean? We get deep out. We get in front of it. We get out there in rough country. You know what I mean? We go after things. We don't hang out on the roads. We don't only go to water. Like we get in front of it. It's aggressive. And that's part of the equation there. And we like it. We like the fact that this happens because it makes us more badass. That's why people sign up. Like there's nothing tougher than, taking on the beast or whatever. I don't know. It's like I said, I'm actually kind of tired of talking about it.
Right. At some point, I want to capture the story you shared with Britt and I the other day, if you're willing, to talk about one of your first acts at that Lessons Learned Center. And I think in order to tell that story, you might have to tell another story. If you don't want to do that today, that's okay.
Yeah.
But I think that illustrates that, as you just alluded to, you're not immune to some of this stuff, much less thinking about
entrapments the way I think lots of people think about entrapments, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not immune to any of this stuff. Like I said before, I've never written about or talked about anything that wasn't completely and entirely about me.
Sure.
I'm not pointing fingers at anybody.
Right.
I'm talking about me and my experience. Mm-hmm. And I think I happen to be fairly common, fairly regular. You know what I mean? I don't know. I think there's people that would argue with whether or not my perspective is a common one. But what you're getting at is my experience with Wagon Box, which is it was an entrapment, and
okay, I got to cut in here. Travis is about to tell a really powerful personal story. When I asked him to do so, I paused for a moment, knowing that it's not always a walk in the park to relive some of these experiences. If you choose to listen to Travis's story here, I want to kind of give you a bit of a warning. Travis and I debated whether or not we should do this, a trauma trigger, a trigger warning, a content warning. I'm not always sure what I think when I see that on TV or hear it on the radio. Maybe sometimes I think people are just too sensitive. Knowing what I know about traumatic injuries, especially burn injuries that wildland firefighters suffer, however, has kind of given me a different perspective on this. So, with that, Travis is going to tell a story. It's somewhat graphic. If you want to listen, go for it. If not, you can fast forward around this story. Suffice it to say, Travis was involved in entrapment in 1999 in Nevada as a member of a hotshot crew. It was an entrapment, actually several, and fellow crew members were seriously burned. If you'd rather not listen to Travis's story, go ahead and fast forward now to about 13 minutes and 33 seconds.
I was on the crew there was burn injuries. There was a serious accident investigation. It was 1999. I was on a hotshot crew, and there was actually multiple entrapments on this one push, and there was some traumatic thing. I heard fellow crew members screaming because they were being burned. They came out. I guess I could tell the whole story from my perspective, which is not the same perspective of everybody that was there. I was a seasonal crew member, and one of the fellow crew members that I could hear screaming came down out of the smoke right back to where I was, and they were all holding their hands up in the air. Most of the people that got burned weren't wearing gloves, so and their hands had that just kind of burned look about them, almost like it's not exactly like skin dripping, but kind of like that. And I remember one of my fellow crew members putting his hands in the little tiny creek that was there, and there's little pieces of skin that floated away. And then we had to hike from there back to the trucks and bandage them up, and it was a traumatic event. People got burned. We got a lot of people pointed fingers, and the accident investigation was fairly typical for the time, which felt very accusatory, and like a lot of people, that was a source of a lot of my angst around reviews and investigations. Everybody has that story. Hey, I was there, and they came in and pointed fingers and called us bad firefighters and all this stuff. So anyway, I went on to work on a fire use module, and an engine captain, all kinds of jobs after that. But I was always highly sensitive to that event, Wagon Box. And eventually, I got a job here at the Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center as an analyst. And that was in 2009. Wagon Box happened in 1999. And
so 10 years later.
10 years later.
I'm good at mathematics.
And
so 10 years later.
10 years later, Dirtball Travis gets an analyst job. Because nobody else applied, or some weird fluke. I don't know. Because they were smart. And it always bothered me. I was a periodic user of the Lessons Learned Center prior to getting my job here. And I had always noted that Wagon Box was listed as Entrapment in the incident review database, and it just bothered me because I didn't see it as that.
Mm-hmm.
And I could get into all kinds of reasons why I didn't see it as an entrapment, but I just didn't. And when I got to the Lessons Learned Center, that was one of the first things I did. Once I learned how to use the incident review databases, I went in there and I changed it. And I can't remember for sure, but I want to say that the report doesn't use the word entrapment.
Wow. Okay.
I had some sort of justification, and I changed it. I used my powers for bad. Or at the time, I thought I was using my powers for good, but whoops. Anyway, I changed it. I went into the IRDB, the Incident Review Database, and changed Wagon Box from Entrapment to something else, like a close call or something.
Well, I'm looking at it, and it's burn injury.
Yeah.
And I suppose this is a weird opportunity. You know, as we're talking about entrapments, you know, we have the opportunity, like literally sitting here as we're recording this, to re-tag this if we want to.
Yeah. You know, that's the thing is it?
Yeah.
It was a burn injury.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
that's not wrong.
Yeah.
That's not wrong.
Yeah. But the bigger deal, I think, you know, you could chase that all kinds of ways. And what I've said about other events is, yeah, no, that the entrapment is the thing that we're probably most concerned about.
Mm-hmm.
That our plan didn't work. It did not work. We had an escape route and we had a safety zone. The fire had other plans, and it just didn't work. It moved too fast. It was crazy that those folks were not able to get through that all they were going to do was cut off a little slop. And man, when that thing went, I happened to be on the good side of it. And man, when it went, there was nothing they could do except back up. And you know, I guess the other piece of that is we did have. It's not that we didn't have a safety zone. It's that the safety zone, we didn't realize that how narrow that canyon was when that other side took off, that radiant heat from the other side was going to be enough to cause burn injuries in the safety zone. Mm-hmm. Because when it took off on the north side of the road, it just slicked everything off, and we were just like, sweet. Now we have good black. Mm-hmm. And you literally step from the road into the black. And as soon as it cools down, man, that's awesome. Mm-hmm. And there's a little slop. Yeah, we'll go to the other side, start working on either side. And I was on the side that was less hot. There was people on the hotter side. And then when that thing went, they did what they had planned, which was retreat into the newly formed black on the north side of the road. But that heat coming off the south side was so intense that the people without gloves got burned. And that's a form of the plan not working.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But, you know, if we got the entrapment lawyers in here, I guess they could kind of have a field day with it.
Mm-hmm.
Because the safety zone worked. They didn't. Yeah, I don't know.
Right.
But again, I'm one of many perspectives on that event, and that's true of every event. There's a lot of different perspectives. And those folks right there weren't the only folks that I had to scramble a little bit. So anyway, that I guess the point of that story is, like you said, I'm not immune to it. It's not, my motivation is not, I want to prove to everybody that they're using the wrong words or that they're bad firefighters or anything like that. I want to bring up the conversation or instigate the dialogue around how common this is. And if we accept that this is much more common than we realize, what does that say about our way of doing business? You know what I mean? It's not long before we get to risk and exposure.
Right. Right.
And that, yeah, the way we do things and this whole notion that aggressive is the safest. And I don't know where I stand on that argument, because that's my comfort zone. I'd rather be real close. That just feels good to me. But it wigs me out that entrapment is occurs to people as regularly as it does. And that's not the only time. I've been entrapped a bunch of other times too, if I used my broad definition. Every time that we say, oh, I scrambled a little bit, I got pinched, I got cut off, or those are all entrapments.
Yep. Prescribed fire, wildfire. It's, one is not immune. One type is not immune. We're just reading about some escape or some prescribed fire stuff the other day that involved folks being entrapped.
Yeah.
So. But
choosing not to use that word.
Right. For probably many of the reasons we just discussed.
Yeah. Social stuff and kind of subconsciously knowing what that means culturally, not what it means literally, but what it means in our culture, especially a prescribed fire. Come on, man.
Yep.
Right? Come on. You can't pull two lines together, and entrapment tends to hover in numbers wise. 10% of all entrapments that are reported tend to be on prescribed fires. I don't know what that really means. We would need a lot more data. I always wonder about what percentage of prescribed fire is fire. What if prescribed fire is 10% of our interactions with fire as a whole? What would that mean? That fire really is fire.
Right, exactly.
Planned event or not. It's like you're literally playing with fire. And the way that we play with fire involves being cut off and having to scramble, and in some cases dying by being overrun by fire. And it's not the way that we die. It's not the most common way that we die related to wildland fire.
No.
But it happens to be big deal events.
Right.
Every so often.
Right.
That's catastrophic. And it really does, it's the ultimate, the heartstrings pull, you know what I mean? Hearing about somebody dying by entrapment feels different than hearing about somebody dying of a heart attack in camp, or even getting hit by a tree.
Right.
Getting hit by a tree seems way more kind of like fate or unavoidable, freak accident, that type of thing. Entrapment is just, man, we like to talk about it partly because it's safe, because the conclusion is typically they screwed up. And that's a comfortable place to be because it's psychologically safe for me, the person talking about it, because I can avoid that situation rather than, the getting hit by a tree or a rock or a heart attack.
What do you do about gravity? We don't have 28 items on a checklist for gravity.
Yeah, and that's funny that the most pointed two tools, 10 and 18. Those are almost entirely about entrapment avoidance. Why is that? Obviously, that's not a data-driven thing. That's an emotional-driven.
Yeah. That's a great story, and it's one you should tell in detail at some point. But yeah, when you look back at our history, back into I point to some of the stuff that happened in the 50s, where we had the big report that says it was about burnovers and it was about entrapments. It was also about injuries as well. That's kind of a footnote. The initial, we used to have 11 fire orders. And there was one that was specifically about injuries. Burn injuries in general, I think, is what they wrote it about. But yeah, there's a long history there. Suffice it to say, 11 fire orders, then 10, 13 watchouts, now 18. They're all oriented at this central element of what it is that we feel like we can control. Like that's fundamentally something, that's what's at play here, is this idea that this element of our work is controllable. And plenty of people can point to their careers and look back in time and say, didn't happen to me, and draw the conclusion that it didn't happen to me because I adhered to, not only was I aggressive, but
and I would say, bullshit. It did happen to you.
Right.
If you spent any real deal time out there, it happened. And I guarantee you've told stories about it too.
Right. Because are they the best stories?
Hell yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And if you don't have good stories, if you're doing this job and you don't have good stories, some would argue you're doing it wrong.
Exactly.
Or some would argue you're doing it right. I don't know. I guess there's two different ways to look at that.
Yeah.
But when it comes time to tell stories, it's better to have a good one than not, I suppose. And obviously, that's not why we do what it is that we do. Or actually, maybe it is. Maybe it is, consciously or otherwise. Maybe that is a huge part of why it is that we do what we do. Do you have a story of a fire behavior-related near miss or close call that you wouldn't describe as an entrapment? Do you call it an entrapment now? Regardless, stories like these can make the otherwise dry fire training come to life and be real. And what would the season-ending crew party be like without stories like these? As harrowing and gnarly as some of them can be, there's great potential for learning in these stories. There's also potential for some lessons when we look at a collection of events. And back when we recorded this conversation, in the second week of 2018, Travis was still in the midst of his analysis for the 2017 Annual Incident Review Summary. Even as some of the 2017 numbers and reports kept coming in, Travis could still make a few noteworthy observations about entrapments in 2017. In addition, we try to tackle two big questions. So what? And what next? Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Those are incidents that we, as the Lessons Learned Center, deemed entrapment.
Right. We're the bad guys
Yeah.
here on that deal. Yeah.
Because there's people, again, submitted reports that said that they were cut off or had to use a temporary refuge area, or they had to do a precautionary deployment, or they their escape route was compromised, or egress was compromised. And we said, okay, perfect. And I went in and put a check in the entrapment column because based on NWCG definition, plan didn't work. It's an entrapment. And again, that's in an effort to, how do we put it in our mission statement? Reveal
risk and complexity
in the wildland fire environment. And I feel like it's our duty to reveal that. And this is one of the ways that we can do that.
Okay. Moving forward, what would you... So let's say Travis is king. Don't think about that too hard. But with regard to entrapment, what do we... Let's say we embrace your current perspective here, because it hasn't always been your perspective. That's fair. Things evolve. Let's say we do. We embrace what you would have us embrace. So what? What next? What do we do with that moving forward? We call entrapments entrapments. We get to a place, we evolve, we mature, however you want to say it. What next?
Yeah, we start to have that that discussion, or that it ultimately it would affect how we engage. right? And I don't know what that is because, I mean, we're talking about a whole cultural shift and we have no idea what that is. I certainly don't. But hopefully it matches reality. Just like, okay, so I see it as our collective situation awareness, right? Situation awareness is, by definition, how closely your perspective matches reality. That's, you know, and people misuse that all the time. So our collective situation awareness, and the whole point of talking about situation awareness is that you are able to more effectively make decisions if your perspective matches reality, right? It's just, that's the whole point. Mm-hmm. And I feel like our collective situation awareness regarding entrapments is not very good. It doesn't match reality. So I don't know what we're going to do once we get better SA, but we might actually say, hey, yeah, that's not cool. Mm-hmm. You know, let's not do that, or let's not, or we just say, okay.
Now we know.
We
were moving forward with a more same direction. We're still going.
Absolutely. It's worth it.
Right.
It's worth it. And, you know, maybe what that leads to is better medical response, i.e. a more well-funded honor guard. Maybe that's the direction we go, is acceptance and acknowledgement and preparation. Mm-hmm. You know, maybe we don't change our tactics. Maybe we just say, you know what, it's worth it. Mm-hmm. This is just part of, we move from the cost to the price. and you're, right. Explain that for us real quick.
Oh boy, that's a good one. Well, I think, we probably all heard sometimes people say, hey, you know, that's the cost doing business. And I think cost is something that's delivered, after the fact, and maybe the cost matches the estimate or not. Price is something, you know, in my mind, it's something, you know, beforehand. It's, you know, it's the difference between, dealing with somebody who's, painting your house and you're not exactly sure how much it's going to be, and you get the cost down the road versus you go to the grocery store and, you know, your box of Wheaties is, you know, $3.49 or whatever. Bam. There's a difference, you know, and it's an orientation, and it's one sort of forward looking and maybe one sort of, maybe not so much forward looking. I don't know, but, yeah.
And knowing the price does, you know, theoretically you can say, you know what? I don't want the Wheaties.
Right.
Whereas if you don't know until it's time to pay.
Right. Exactly. You could get to the checkout and go, hey, look, that Wheaties, that's $1,000, you know? But, no, you can look and say, well, actually I'd rather have the oatmeal. It's whether it's cost or something else about what it is that you're engaging with. And that's the important part of this conversation with entrapments, is we may look and we go, yeah, okay, actually the reality of entrapments is, you know, we expose, you know, X number of people per year, X number of pieces of equipment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we go, yeah, no, and we're still good. We're okay with that. We have a cleaner sense. We have more of a price-oriented sense, and we're going to keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah, and it's possible that we can take some of the punch out of alienating people.
Right.
You know, maybe
that's another huge thing here.
We could just call it what it is. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been there. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, that does happen. We obviously we want to invest in whatever we can to avoid that. At the same time, accepting the fact that it happens.
Given the way we do things.
Given the way that we do things, you know, we're going to protect structures. Guess what? I mean, you're literally going out in front of the fire, trying to figure out whether or not you can do something, and then if you can, hanging out. You know. And arguably, you could say, no, this is a safe spot. This is my safety zone. Therefore, if the fire burns around me, it's not an entrapment. I totally buy that logic. Mm-hmm. That happened. If it turns out that your assessment was wrong and it ends up not being safe, that's your plan not working. Or if it gets close to it and you go, it's not feeling good. Let's go ahead and let's get out of here. Your plan's not working, even if you make it to someplace. Mm-hmm. Now that's a weird scenario, and maybe that's all it is acknowledging that our plans don't always work, and sometimes they have catastrophic events. But it's funny, even reporting entrapments where nobody got hurt. Mm-hmm. Like, why was it that we got reports saying, why did somebody feel compelled to report an instance where somebody's egress was compromised? Especially if they argue it's not an entrapment.
Right.
Why'd you report it?
Mm-hmm. Why was this a big deal?
Yeah. Is there something to learn? The insinuation or the assumption is this isn't how we want things to happen.
Right. This is a situation to be avoided in the future.
Yeah.
But it's not an entrapment.
Yeah. And that's where it gets all, chances are if you wrote something down and you sent it to the Lessons Learned Center and it had to do with, fire moving fast, it's probably an entrapment.
Mm-hmm. Safety zones, escape routes, post calls,
all of that
pinches,
stuff.
near misses, tight spot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I want that data and I want to learn from it because I don't like being entrapped. I don't like those tight spots. Mm-hmm. It scares me more now than it ever has in the past. In the past, I just, I didn't think much of it.
To wrap up this conversation on entrapments, Travis had one final thought on training and the reality of entrapments.
We put a lot of effort into educating ourselves about avoiding entrapment. And somehow there's utility for me to acknowledge that we put all that effort and all that training and all this emphasis and, so much of what we talk about is entrapment avoidance, and it still happens all the time. That just illustrates how dynamic the environment is. And I don't think we give it full credence.
Well, there you go. Some thoughts from our view, our perspective on the concept of entrapments. What do you think? Are we onto something? Do you buy it? Are entrapments more common than we're perhaps all willing to acknowledge? Let us know. Give us a comment, leave some feedback. And wherever you get the podcast, please leave us a review. They really do help. And as always, we love hearing from folks who listen to the podcast. Just today, in fact, we got another great postcard from the Tahoe National Forest in California. Thanks very much, Jennifer. Finally, and as always, thanks a ton for your time. Recently, Travis and I went to the grocery store. We were looking for some cereal. We were in for a surprise. Hey, look, that Wheaties, that's $1,000.
You know what? I don't want the Wheaties.
Good choice.